I do want to get your take on something that we heard out of Iran. Iran's president today saying it would be better if the war would just end now, while Tehran is in a position of strength. When you hear those comments, especially as there are some indications, right, that Iran may be starting to feel a bit of this economic squeeze from the U.S., how do you read not only those comments from the president, but the decision to put them out now?
I think both parties are in a stalemate right now, and I know they're all kind of making motions. The United States is trying to apply some economic pressure. Iran continues to close the Straits of Hormuz, putting economic pressure on the United States, and basically firing missiles at our allies in the Arab world. Both are hoping the other side will give. I don't see that happening. Our intelligence makes clear that economic pressure alone is not going to have Iran be willing to come to any kind of agreement on ending the war. And so what I see right now is a prescription for a prolonged war that's going to continue and will continue to, frankly, hurt the United States economically, but also in terms of our strength in the world. The rest of the world is looking at the situation in Iran, and what they see is the possibility of another lost war. That would really hurt credibility of America in the world that we're dealing with, which is very dangerous.
Secretary Leon Panetta, always appreciate your insight and your perspective. Thank you.
China is responding to President Trump's new threat against Iran, which includes imposing economic penalties on any country doing business with Iran. Beijing's foreign ministry spokesperson says sanctions and pressure tactics are not the solution. Iran, for its part, is vowing to prosecute and imprison anyone who carries out President Trump's so-called economic D-Day against Tehran. It comes after the president vowed to impose the most crushing economic operation ever taken against any country and demanded that other countries stop doing business with Iran. Joining me now, CNN senior military analyst, retired Admiral James Stavridis. Thank you so much for being here. Look, this is part of the president's new strategy to crush Iran financially as opposed to bombing Iran constantly. Is this strategy one that appears to be a better choice?
It's the best of a bunch of bad options, Sarah, meaning the president could go back to full-blown hostilities, drop lots and lots of bombs. That's very expensive, both in terms of finance for the munitions themselves and potentially the cost of our brave men and women in arms. So bad option. He could also simply wash his hands of this, no pun intended, given the maritime character, and walk away from it. Again, really bad option. So what's he left with? Essentially what you see right now, which is a blockade along the Iranian coastline. You're showing about 1,000 miles of Iranian coastal ports. They're all under blockade. From all I can see, the Navy's doing a reasonably good job at this. It's putting pressure on Tehran. Final thought brings us to the present moment. It's not enough to make it happen quickly. So now he is trying to enlist the rest of the world to step in and be part of this blockade. I think that's going to be problematic, and China is only the first country that's going to decline the honor of being part of the blockade of Iran.
All right, I do want to ask you about what's happening in the seas there. Given your expertise, the USS George Washington has arrived to replace the USS Abraham Lincoln in the region. And I know you've seen all this reporting, as have we of families and sailors saying that they were suffering serious difficulties with food, mental capacity there on the USS Abraham Lincoln. They have dealt with shortages, supply shortages, and endured a historically long deployment. What changes here? Will it still be quite difficult to make sure that this ship doesn't face those same kinds of issues?
This is exactly the issue, Sarah, that the Navy is pulling apart right now in terms of the Abraham Lincoln situation. What went wrong? A clearly very stressful deployment for the crew. The crew performed magnificently. I think they'll be recognized for this long, arduous deployment, but it's not how it's supposed to work. They're supposed to have good food, hot showers, toilets that work, opportunity to get a break from the front line. None of that happened. So what happened and why? Navy looking at it. Here's something not widely reported. The Iranians were able to take out a big chunk of the logistics that support these big carriers. They struck the central logistic hub in Bahrain very early in the conflict. So what has changed is the Navy has backfilled those logistic chains. And I think our sailors on board the GW, the George Washington, are going to have a much better cruise. We all ought to salute the Abraham Lincoln as they sail home from a very tough stretch in war.
Admiral, it's always good to have you here to talk us through these things with your expertise. Thank you so much and have a good weekend.
Colonel Layton, President Trump has now threatened, as you know, a so-called economic D-Day against Iran, vowing, and I'm quoting him now, tremendous economic consequences against countries that continue to do business with Iran. Do you have a sense of what that entails? And would that include, for example, punishing countries that send medical supplies, food, other essentials to Iran?
Yeah, if it does, it would certainly broaden the scope of the sanctions against Iran because medical supplies had previously been exempt from those kinds of sanctions. One of the key things I think to think about here, Wolf, is that if the sanctions aren't coupled with methods to cut off supplies to Iran, such as the rail links that go into Turkmenistan, which then connect to the Russian rail system and the Chinese rail system, if those rail links aren't cut off, those sanctions may not have very much of an effect. The Iranians are very much used to surviving sanctions, and they're very much used to being able to basically do without the kinds of things that the rest of the world really thinks about and really uses. So it's going to be critical, if they impose these sanctions, it's going to be critical to have some significant actions taken both on the military front as well as the economic front to be effective.
If the U.S. were to impose sanctions against countries, whether Russia, China, or other countries, that would now would be refusing to send food or medical supplies, medical equipment to Iran, would that be considered a war crime?
Potentially, yes, because under the modern rules of warfare, you don't cut off food supplies for civilian populations. In the past, that was done, in major conflicts like World War II, you had incidents where they did cut off food supplies. But in the modern way of doing warfare, that would be considered potentially a war crime, and it could also impact the way in which other countries respond to the U.S., because I think there would be a large international outcry against such a move.
Let's turn to Jasmine El-Gamal, who's a former Middle East advisor at the US Defense Department and CEO of Avros Strategies, a geopolitical analyst group. She also hosts the podcast, The View from Here, and she joins us now in London. Jasmine, great to see you. Look, so many things for us to get into here. I want to begin, I guess, with the rhetoric that we've heard in the past 24 hours and the fact that Donald Trump is facing criticism for his comment to bomb Iran, but also questions as to why he would choose to do such a thing. Just take a quick listen to this.
Oman has been a security partner of ours and are critical in any kind of negotiation we're going to have with the Iranians. So if Donald Trump thinks he's going to find a way out of this, and I certainly hope that he does, I think the Oman is a critical negotiator with Iran. So it doesn't make a ton of sense. I mean, it looks like he's trying to just make more enemies. And that's not a strategy.
Well, why Donald Trump chose to threaten Oman is still kind of unclear today. The question is, how damaging could this be for the Trump administration? Because we're at a time when the US are failing to make inroads in negotiations with Iran. And this appeared to be the only diplomatic channel that was working.
Well, I guess I would argue with you there. I would say that it's fairly clear why President Trump is saying what he's saying about Oman, and that is he's incredibly frustrated. This war with Iran has not gone the way that he thought it would, or that he was told that it would by its proponents. And it's been, it's going nearly to 6 months now with no seeming end in sight. And so understandably, the president is frustrated. Many would argue that that it's due to his own decision making that we are at this point in time. But it is not a credible threat in any sense. It doesn't appear to be a credible threat, I would say. The reason I say that is because he's made these kinds of statements before. He's talked about bombing Oman before. He's talked about bombing, I don't remember the exact terms, but when he talked about erasing civilization in Iran, he's prone to these kinds of bombastic statements when he's feeling frustrated. And I think that's what you saw there.
Yeah, and I think a reflection of his frustration could also be seen perhaps in the image that Donald Trump posted on his social media earlier today, showing the Strait of Hormuz labeled as new US territory. I mean, even given that, how do you think this will be, or an image like that will be received, especially by, Gulf allies?
Well, look, I mean, he did the same with Greenland, and we went through that whole, that whole play as well back then. It's meant to provoke. It's meant to provoke some sort of reaction, move the needle somehow. Some would argue that's not the best way to move forward in a negotiation. Our Gulf allies are going to continue doing what they've been doing, which is trying to reach the president behind the scenes and let him know that A, what he's doing is not helpful, and B, what everyone needs to do in the region right now is turn down the temperature. And so you are seeing diplomatic efforts ongoing. They've never really stopped, whether it's the Qataris, the Turks, the Pakistanis, or the Omanis. Those conversations have been ongoing, both amongst one another and with Iran as well. So you'll continue to see that happening behind the scenes. When I speak to Gulf officials, the message is the same. This is the region that we are living in. We are bearing the brunt of this, and we will have to find a way to coexist and move forward. And so that's what you'll see happening behind the scenes, trying to get President Trump to understand that diplomacy really is the only way through this. And echoing General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, leaning on military action over and over again and expecting a different result, is not very. General Kane didn't use these words, but it's not very rational.
Yes. And I mean, of course, Iran are watching all of this very closely. And we saw today that Iran are doubling down, issuing a list of demands that the US need to fulfill before Tehran reopens the strait, calling again for the US to commit to the terms of the MOU. But as we saw yesterday, of course, that 60-day deadline passed without any agreement. And we heard Donald Trump saying that he was in no hurry. Where does that leave us with the MOU? Does it render it meaningless? Is it dead? What's the view?
Right. So the MOU, the time period has passed in which the two parties were supposed to negotiate on broader issues like the nuclear program and so on. And it is unclear whether there will be a new MOU negotiated between the US and Iran. I think the US focus right now is on getting the strait opened and relieving that economic pressure. As you know, the US midterms are around the corner, and President Trump is now facing a 33% approval rating, really by far the lowest of his 2 terms, I believe. And so the pressure is on the US in that sense. However, the pressure is also on the Iranians. Now, the Iranians are maximizing their demands. They are saying that they will go on the offensive now and not just remain in defensive mode. But they have also been under severe economic pressure. In fact, they started this war going into it under economic pressure and heavy protests from within the Iranian population. So it remains and continues to be this war of timelines, this game of chicken to see who will blink first. Both sides are obviously trying to maintain maximum pressure on the other, while both hurting to various degrees themselves. And so this is where, again, you will see those diplomatic efforts that I talked about earlier, really trying to bridge that gap between the two sides and try to get them back in some form, whether directly or indirectly, to the negotiating table to try to come to an end to this war that's hurting everyone in the region.
Joining me now, Army Colonel Peter Mansour. He's a former aide to General David Petraeus and a professor of military history at Ohio State University. It's good to have you with us. So when we look at where things stand, President Trump's inconsistency comes as Qatar is now voicing support for Oman's talks with Iran. This despite threats from President Trump to ban Oman over the Hormuz dispute. And notably, those negotiations were a requirement of the MOU, which the president once hailed. Do these threats from Trump risk excluding the U.S. from the shaping of any agreement on the strait?
The threats are absolutely not helpful. They're typical Trump bluster. He doesn't like being excluded from these negotiations, and he doesn't know what Oman and Iran are agreeing to. And if it includes their control over the Strait of Hormuz and the ability of Iran to exact tolls, he's not going to have any part of that. And thus he has struck out in the way he knows with typical bluster and threats that probably will not be acted upon.
In terms of bluster, he also posted this image, I think we can put it up for you, of the Strait of Hormuz, labeling it as new U.S. territory. How much does that further complicate things?
It doesn't complicate things at all. Everyone knows this is not true. I think it's pushback against Iran, which claims the strait as its own territory. And he says, okay, well, two can play that game. We'll claim it as well. In fact, it's an international waterway. I think all sides need to agree on that. But that's one of the problems with these negotiations. Iran wants to control the strait. And until it agrees that it's an international waterway, I don't think we're going to come to any sort of diplomatic solution to this crisis.
In the Oval Office yesterday, Trump reiterated his goal for this war was to keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon. In terms of what you see, is the U.S. military strategy right now doing anything to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon?
Well, it's done quite a bit. I mean, it's hit the Iranian nuclear facilities, its manufacturing plants. It has really set back its nuclear program. Ironically, I think negotiations on the nuclear program are probably easier at this point than negotiations on opening the strait. Iran has made it its goal in life to control the Strait of Hormuz, which it views as its only leverage against the United States and our allies to prevent another attack on Iran. The nuclear program, the Iranian nuclear program, isn't going anywhere quickly. We all know that they want to gain a nuclear weapon eventually, but that can be stymied in the future by further action.
I also wanted to ask you about the Houthis, so a proxy of Iran, right, in Yemen, now claiming an attack on a Saudi oil refinery. There have been clashes intensifying in the Bab al-Mandab Strait. Are you concerned about a new front opening?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the ways that we were able to sort of ease the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz was to have Saudi pump oil to its terminal on the Red Sea and then move through the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb and get it to Asia. That's been closed down now, and it has created a significant blockage. The only way to get that oil out now is through the Suez Canal, which has also been hit by the Houthis. So this is a problem and a very unwelcome development.
Yeah. Colonel, always appreciate your perspective. Thank you.